Welcome back to Religion Camp. My name is Mark Gagnon, and welcome to my tent where I explore the most interesting, controversial, and fascinating stories from all religions from around the world from all time. And to all my Muslim friends, salam. Happy late Ramadan. I missed it. But it was during this Ramadan season that I was talking to my Muslim friends, and it got me curious about this thing known as the Kaaba. The Kaaba is a fascinating religious pilgrimage site. It is the house of God, the house of Allah, but I didn't know much else about it. I would see, pictures of Muslims in worship, but I always assumed it was like a giant cube of obsidian. That's what I thought. A giant black cube. I thought the whole thing was just like made out of obsidian, which I now have learned is not the case. So if you are like me, if you were not raised Muslim, if you don't know all the ins and outs of Islam, then this will be a great episode to break down what is really going on in Mecca around the Hajj. I'm joined here today by my good friend Christos. How are you, Christos?
Doing well. How's everyone doing?
They can't respond to you, so I hope they're doing well as well. Also, let me just note, if I have anything incorrect in this episode, I'm sorry, all right? I'm not Muslim. I was not raised Muslim. This is my best to try to understand culture and people through a deep dive on the things that I find interesting. And I think there's no better way to understand a culture than to understand the God that they worship. So let's start with the Kaaba, all right? You've probably seen, like I have, this big black cube, a massive crowd circling around it. Let's throw a picture up right now so anyone that hasn't seen it, they can check it out. And if you're like me, you're probably wondering, what is it? Why is it so significant? What does it all mean? Well, in order to understand the Kaaba and Islamic tradition, you got to go all the way back before there was a physical Kaaba in Mecca. There was this, celestial prototype. And again, my Arabic is very bad. My pronunciation is going to be awful, okay? I'm doing my best, okay? The Beit al-Mahamur. This is also known as the frequented house. This is the heavenly Kaaba. Okay, this is the Kaaba that exists in the heavens, okay? And I say heavens plural because in Muslim cosmology, it is in the seventh heaven. And it is said that 70,000 angels visit it daily in order to perform worship, circling it in ritual prayer. Sound familiar? Because that's what's interesting about Islam. As Muslims during the Hajj are performing tawaf, which is the ritual circling of the Kaaba, they're essentially participating in the same cosmic ritual that connects heaven and earth, doing on earth what angels are simultaneously doing in heaven. Now, there's one angel that's very important to this story, the angel Jibril, also known as Gabriel, if any of my Jewish or Christian friends are watching. The angel Jibril told the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, while he was visiting the seventh heaven. Jibril also told Muhammad that when the 70,000 angels leave, they never return, but another group of 70,000 angels show up the next day in their place, a constant turnstile of religious worship. But did this heavenly concept come down to earth? Well, this is where Adam enters the picture. Yes, the same Adam from the Garden of Eden. According to Islamic tradition, after Adam and Eve were cast out of paradise for eating the forbidden fruit, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they landed in different places on earth, which is interesting. As a Christian, we were always taught that Adam and Eve left together. But in Islam, that is not the case. Adam landed in what is now known as Sri Lanka, while Eve ended up in Jeddah, near modern-day Mecca. They were completely separated with no idea where the other was, male and female circling the earth without knowing where their partner could be. Adam, heartbroken and searching for Eve. I mean, that's like a terrible day for the record, right? Like as a Christian, I think about the Garden of Eden all the time, right? Like you're there with your girl, she breaks the lease agreement, and then you guys are kicked out. And Islam, it's even worse because not only are you kicked out, you don't even know where your other half is. So Adam, heartbroken, searching for Eve, wanders the earth. During this time, the angel Jibril appears to him and guides him to a spot in the valley of Mecca. It's not a random location. It was directly beneath where the heavenly Beit al-Mahamur stood in the celestial realm. Again, this is the heavenly Kaaba. Gabriel instructed Adam to build a simple structure for worship, the very first Kaaba. It wasn't the grand cube that we know today, but more of a simple demarcation of sacred space. Adam constructed it using stones from 5 sacred mountains: Sinai, Zeytun, Lebanon, Judi, and Hira. Each of these mountains has its own significance in various religious traditions, topic for a different episode. The structure became the very first place of worship dedicated to the one God on earth, Allah. Adam would perform his prayers there, and he was doing tawaf, circling the Kaaba as Muslims do today. Sometimes religious scholars like to call this process circumambulating. Basically just means, worshiping in a circle, moving around it. I wonder if actually, I think Punjabis do a version of this when they get married. I remember that from an Indian wedding that I went to. I wonder if it's the same thing. I wonder if it comes from that same idea of like worship as you move in a circle. Regardless, there's something beautiful about this concept, right? The idea that the very first human also established the very first place of worship, and it creates this unbroken chain of monotheistic worship stretching back to the literal beginning of time. But what happened to Adam's Kaaba? Great question. Well, this is where nature comes in. Over centuries and millennia, the original structure didn't survive. Floods, particularly in the Valley of Mecca, gradually eroded the original foundation. Eventually, all that remained was just a slight depression in the earth, a groove, a subtle marking of where the first house of worship stood. Fast forward thousands of years to around 2000 BC. This is where Abraham enters the story, okay? The patriarch recognized in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all right? The big OG. And the Quran and Islamic tradition tell us that Abraham followed God's command. He brought his wife Hagar and their infant son Ishmael to the empty, uninhabited valley of Mecca. This is where a major test of faith occurs, leaving his family in a desolate valley with minimal provisions. The famous story goes that after Abraham departed, Hagar ran 7 times between the hills of Safa and Marwa searching for water for her thirsty child. This desperate search is commemorated by Muslims during the Hajj in a ritual called Sa'i. When things looked like they couldn't get worse for Hagar, her poor infant Ishmael was kicking at the ground, and miraculously, a spring of water gushed forth beneath his feet. This is the famous well of Zamzam, which still flows today, provides water to millions of pilgrims annually. This water source transformed the barren valley and eventually attracted the Jurum tribe to settle there. And Mecca gradually becomes this inhabited settlement. Years later, when Ishmael had grown into a young man, Abraham returns to Mecca to visit his son. And during this visit, Abraham receives a divine revelation, a command to rebuild the Kaaba in the exact spot where Adam's original structure stood. Now, here's where the story gets even more interesting. According to tradition, Abraham wasn't left to guess where the ancient site was located. The angel Gabriel, again, Jibril, I'm going to say Gabriel for the record, just because I grew up Catholic. It's the same angel, right? The angel Gabriel appears again to Abraham and physically marked the footprint of the original structure. Some accounts even say Gabriel helped Abraham excavate the area until they found the original foundation laid by Adam. What's remarkable about the tradition is how it connects these two pivotal figures, right? Adam, the first human, and Abraham, the patriarch of Islam and much of modern monotheism. The symbolism in having Abraham rebuild what Adam originally constructed forms this unbroken spiritual lineage. The construction process itself is filled with fascinating details. Here's a couple. Abraham and Ishmael worked together, gathering stones from surrounding hills. As the walls grew higher, Abraham needed a way to reach the upper portions. This is where the famous Maqam Ibrahim, the station of Abraham, comes into the story. According to the tradition, Abraham stood on a stone while building the upper walls of the Kaaba. Miraculously, this stone rose up beneath his feet as needed, elevating him to the required height. Even more amazingly, the stone softened like clay to receive the imprints of his feet. These footprints, said to be Abraham's, are still preserved today near the Kaaba inside a special glass enclosure. Millions of pilgrims visit this stone during their Hajj and Umrah rituals, often praying behind it after completing their tawaf. The original Kaaba was a simple, roofless, rectangular structure with a foundation about 3 feet high and the walls reaching about 12 feet tall. It had a door elevated above the ground, to protect from flooding, which is common in the valley. And unlike today's cube, the original structure Abraham built may have been rectangular rather than perfectly square, although this is, of course, contested by Muslim historians. Abraham and Ishmael dedicated the completed structure to the worship of the one God, Allah, establishing it as a place of pilgrimage. The Quran records a beautiful prayer they made upon its completion. After completing the Kaaba, Abraham made a universal call for pilgrimage, inviting people from all directions to visit this sacred house. Islamic tradition holds that he stood on a nearby mountain and called out, and his voice miraculously reached all corners of the earth. It's said that all souls who would ever be born until the day of judgment heard this call, and that those destined to perform the pilgrimage responded with "Lebak, here I am, at your service," in Arabic. What's fascinating is that archaeologists confirm that there has indeed been a structure at this site for thousands of years, although pinpointing the exact date of the original construction remains challenging. The area around Mecca shows evidence of ancient settlements and religious activity dating back a millennia. But here is something to think about. Whether you take this origin story literally or view it symbolically, it clearly shows what the Kaaba represents and how much deeper it is than just a physical building. It embodies this profound concept of sacred space, a meeting point between heaven and earth, and the focal point for human devotion to God.